If you haven't watched part 1 of this story, make sure to watch and come back to this video. Enjoy. The baby in the monitor's crib started to cry, the sound tinny and distant. My head spun as I tried to make sense of what I was seeing. Chris moved toward the figure, raising the lamp like he was about to swing. But before he could, the figure stepped back into the shadows and vanished. The monitor went dark, and the room was silent again, except for Emma's cries. Chris lowered the lamp, his chest heaving. What the hell just happened? I shook my head, unable to answer. My eyes were fixed on the monitor, waiting for it to come back to life. Whatever that thing was, I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper, it thinks Emma doesn't belong to us. Chris turned to me, his face pale. And it wants her back. For a long time, neither of us moved. The silence felt thick, suffocating. My ears strained for the faintest sound, anything to tell me that the figure was gone for good. Emma stirred in my arms, her cries fading into soft hiccups. I could feel her heartbeat against my chest, fast and uneven, and I knew mine matched hers. Chris finally set the lamp down on the dresser, his hand shaking as he did. What now? He whispered. I shook my head, still staring at the monitor. The screen was blank, the tiny green power light glowing like nothing had happened. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what we could do. Maybe we should call someone, he said, his voice uncertain. Like, the police? Or, I don't know, someone who knows about this kind of thing. I looked at him, my eyes wide. And what do we even tell them? That a shadow thing came into our baby's room and showed us that? I gestured to the monitor, even though the image of the strange crib was gone. They'll think we're insane. Chris ran a hand through his hair, pacing back and forth. Okay, then what? Do we just sit here and wait for it to come back? Because I can't do that, Claire. I can't just do nothing. I wanted to argue, to tell him we needed to think this through, but the truth was, I didn't have a better plan. My mind kept circling back to the same question, what did it want? Chris stopped pacing and looked at me. Let's leave. Just for the night. We can go to my mom's house or a hotel, anywhere but here. I hesitated, glancing down at Emma. She'd finally fallen asleep again, her tiny hand clutching the front of my shirt. The idea of leaving felt wrong. Like we'd be giving up ground to whatever that thing was. But staying here. I couldn't shake the feeling that it was waiting for something. Okay, I said finally. Let's go. Chris nodded, relief washing over his face. He grabbed a bag from the closet and started tossing in essentials, diapers, bottles, a change of clothes. I stayed by the crib, holding Emma close. The room felt heavier now, like the air was pressing down on me. As Chris zipped up the bag, the monitor crackled again. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. Chris stopped, too, his eyes darting toward the screen. Bring her back, the voice said, low and distorted. I felt my knees buckle, and I had to grip the side of the crib to stay upright. The words hung in the air, heavier than before. Chris grabbed the monitor and yanked the plug from the wall. There, he said, his voice tight. No more of that. But even unplugged, the monitor flickered back to life. The screen glowed faintly, and static hissed from the speaker. Chris, I whispered, backing away. He stared at the monitor in his hands like it had burned him. Then he dropped it onto the dresser and stepped back. The static grew louder, almost deafening. I clutched Emma tighter, her body squirming as she started to stir again. The screen on the monitor flickered, and for a split second, I thought I saw something, a flash of that dark room, the crib, the baby. Then it was gone. The static stopped, and the monitor went dark again. Chris looked at me, his face pale. We're leaving. Now. I didn't argue. We grabbed the bag and headed down the hallway, Emma still cradled in my arms. The house felt different as we moved through it, like it wasn't ours anymore. Every shadow seemed to stretch too far, every creak of the floorboards felt deliberate. We reached the front door, and Chris fumbled with the lock. His hands were shaking so badly that it took him 3 tries to get it opened. As the door swung open, I turned to look back down the hallway. For just a moment, I thought I saw something move in the shadows near the stairs. A flicker of motion, too quick to make out. I shook my head and followed Chris outside, my heart pounding. We got into the car, and Chris started the engine. The headlights lit up the front of the house, casting long shadows across the yard. Where are we going? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Chris didn't answer right away. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white. Somewhere safe, he said finally. But as we pulled out of the driveway, I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't running to safety. We were running from something we didn't understand. The road stretched out before us, empty and endless. Chris drove in silence, his hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing tethering him to reality. I sat in the passenger seat, holding Emma close, her tiny breaths warm against my chest. Neither of us had spoken since we left the house. The weight of what we'd seen and heard hung between us like a storm cloud. The soft hum of the car's engine felt deafening in the silence. Where are we even going? I asked finally, my voice barely audible over the hum of the tires on the pavement. Chris glanced at me, his jaw tight. I don't know. Maybe my mom's. Or a motel. I nodded, even though the thought of dragging this darkness into someone else's home made my stomach twist. Emma stirred in my arms, letting out a soft whimper. Chris looked at her through the rearview mirror. She's okay, right? For now, I said, though I didn't really believe it. The dashboard clock read 2:37 a.m. The world outside was pitch black, the kind of darkness that seemed to swallow the car's headlights. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of something out of the corner of my eye, a shadow flickering at the edge of the road, a shape moving just beyond the reach of the light. I told myself it was my imagination. Chris turned onto a narrow, winding road lined with trees. Their branches arched overhead, forming a tunnel that made me feel like we were driving straight into the mouth of something alive. We need to stop soon, he said, his voice strained. I can't keep driving all night. I didn't argue. My body ached from the tension, and Emma needed a proper place to rest. But every part of me screamed that stopping was the wrong choice. We passed a gas station with a single flickering light above the pumps. Chris slowed down, but I grabbed his arm. Don't, I said. That he looked at me, confused. We need gas. Not here, I whispered. There was something off about the place. The shadows seemed darker, deeper, like they were waiting for us to stop. Chris must have seen the fear in my eyes because he pressed the gas pedal and kept driving. We finally pulled into the parking lot of a small roadside motel. The neon sign buzzed faintly, casting a sickly red glow over the cracked pavement. It looked deserted, but at least it wasn't the gas station. Chris got out and went to the office to check us in. I stayed in the car, my eyes scanning the darkness. The baby monitor was still in the diaper bag at my feet. I hadn't touched it since we left the house, but now it felt like it was watching me, waiting for the right moment to come back to life. Emma whimpered again, her little fists curling and uncurling in her sleep. I kissed the top of her head, murmuring soft reassurances even though I wasn't sure who I was trying to comfort, her or myself. Chris came back a few minutes later, holding a key. Room 8, he said, nodding toward the far end of the lot that we carried Emma and our things inside. The room was small and dingy, with peeling wallpaper and a faint smell of mildew. The bed creaked loudly when Chris sat on it, and the flickering fluorescent light in the bathroom buzzed like a swarm of angry bees. It's not much, but it's better than the car, Chris said, trying to sound reassuring. I set Emma's carrier on the bed and carefully laid her inside. She stirred but didn't wake. Chris turned on the TV, keeping the volume low. Static filled the screen. Great, he muttered, flipping through the channels. Every single one was static. I froze. Turn it off, I said quickly. That he frowned, but did as I asked, the screen going black with a faint click. We sat in silence for a while, the room heavy with tension. I kept glancing at the diaper bag, half expecting the monitor to start hissing again. Do you think it'll follow us here? I asked finally. Chris didn't answer right away. He rubbed a hand over his face, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. I don't know, he admitted. But if it does, we'll figure it out. I wanted to believe him, but something about his tone told me he wasn't as confident as he sounded. The room grew colder as the night dragged on. I pulled the thin motel blanket tighter around Emma and myself, trying to ignore the feeling of being watched. Around 4 a.m., I heard it again, a faint whisper, so quiet I thought I might have imagined it. Bring her back. My heart stopped. I looked at Chris, but he was already asleep, his head resting against the wall. The whisper came again, louder this time. Bring her back. It was coming from the diaper bag. I didn't want to move. My body felt frozen, every instinct screaming at me to stay still. But I couldn't just sit there. Slowly, I reached down and unzipped the bag. The baby monitor was glowing faintly, even though it was still unplugged. Bring her back. This time, the voice was clearer, almost pleading. I turned the monitor over in my hands, trying to make sense of what was happening. The screen flickered, and for a brief moment, I saw it again, the dark room, the strange crib, the shadowy figure standing just out of view. Then the screen went black. Claire? Chris's voice startled me. I looked up to see him staring at me, his eyes wide with fear. What's wrong? He asked. I held up the monitor. It's still happening, I whispered. Chris stood up, grabbing the monitor from me. He shook it like that would somehow make it stop, but it didn't. The voice came again, louder now. Bring her back. And then, as if on cue, Emma started crying. Emma's cries pierced the air, sharp and frantic. I scooped her up, holding her against my chest as Chris fiddled helplessly with the monitor. The voice continued, louder now, overlapping with Emma's sobs like it was trying to drown her out. Bring her back. Bring her back. Smash it, I hissed at Chris. Just break the damn thing. He didn't move, his eyes fixed on the flickering screen. What if it makes things worse? What could possibly be worse than this? I snapped. Before he could answer, the screen flickered again, and the room plunged into an eerie silence. Even Emma's cries faltered, her tiny body trembling against mine. The monitor's glow shifted, revealing the dark room we'd seen before, only this time, the shadowy figure wasn't lingering in the background. It was closer. The figure was standing in the center of the crib, its form sharper than before, though still cloaked in darkness. And then it turned its head. Slowly. Deliberately. I gasped, stumbling back as Emma whimpered in my arms. Did you see that? I whispered. Chris nodded, his face pale. It looked at us. The monitor buzzed, static spilling into the room again. But this time, the voice was different. It wasn't just repeating the same phrase. It was talking. Bring her back. You know why. You know what you did. Chris's hand tightened around the monitor. We didn't do anything, he shouted, his voice cracking. The figure in the screen tilted its head, as if mocking him. The static warped, and the words that followed sent a chill down my spine. Not the child. I froze, my mind racing. Her. What did it mean? My first instinct was to think of Emma, but something in the voice, its tone, its deliberate emphasis, made me realize it wasn't talking about her. Chris looked at me, his eyes wide with confusion and guilt. Claire, he started, but the monitor buzzed again, cutting him off. The scene on the screen changed. It wasn't the strange room anymore. It was somewhere else, somewhere familiar. My childhood bedroom. I couldn't breathe. The pink wallpaper with tiny yellow wilting daisies. The old wooden rocking chair by the window. The bloody stuffed bear that always sat on my bed. What the hell is this? I whispered. Chris didn't answer. He was staring at the screen, his jaw clenched. The voice came again, clearer than ever. You shouldn't have left her. You shouldn't have forgotten. The words hit me like a punch to the chest. Memories I'd buried deep started to claw their way to the surface, fragments of nights spent crying in that room, the sound of my mom's voice singing me to sleep, and then the silence when she wasn't there anymore. No, I whispered, shaking my head. This doesn't make sense. Chris turned to me, his face pale. Claire, what's it talking about? Who is it talking about? I couldn't answer. My mind was a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The monitor buzzed again, the image on the screen shifting once more. This time, it was a woman. She was sitting in the rocking chair, her face turned away. But I didn't need to see her face to know who she was. A mom? I whispered, my voice barely audible. The woman turned her head slightly, just enough for me to catch a glimpse of her profile. It was her soft brown curls, the curve of her cheek, the way she always held her hands clasped in her lap. Bring her back, Claire. Or I will. The screen went dark. I stared at it, my heart racing. The room felt impossibly cold, the air thick with something I couldn't explain. Emma started crying again, her wails cutting through the silence like a knife. Chris put a hand on my shoulder, his grip firm. Claire. What does this mean? What does it want? I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because deep down, I already knew that IT didn't want Emma. It wanted me, and it wasn't going to stop until it got what it came for. Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, it really helps the channel grow. And if you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future uploads.